don't you think men really like intelligence more when it comes right down to it?
Please, are we going to go back to that? Are you kidding?
Sure, I mean, a brain, you know.
In the history of country music, certain names just stick with you, like the last few notes of a pedal steel on a quiet night. Bill Anderson is one of those names. They call him Whisperin' Bill, a man whose pen has written the soundtrack for generations and whose soft-spoken style hides the power of his words. For over 60 years, he's been a constant, a member of the Grand Ole Opry since 1961 and a force on the charts for an incredible 7 decades straight. Then there's Gene Watson, a voice out of Texas, as pure and strong as the state is wide. When Watson hit the national scene in the mid-'70s, his sound was unapologetically country. As trends came and went, his voice was an anchor, tying everything back to the honky-tonk traditions of George Jones and Ray Price. He wasn't just a singer. He was a standard-bearer for music that was honest, traditional, and true. These two men, both titans in their own right, have walked parallel paths for decades. One, the master, storyteller from Nashville. The other, the Texas vocalist who could find the deepest emotion in any song. Their careers have been woven together in ways big and small, built on a foundation of quiet, mutual respect. It's a relationship that's rarely made headlines, a connection felt more in the music than in interviews. But some stories just get better with age. After all these years, you might think you know everything about a legend like Bill Anderson. But there's one relationship, one profound artistic admiration, that he's rarely discussed with this kind of honesty. At 87 years old, Bill Anderson is finally opening up about the one and only Gene Watson. What he has to say isn't a story of rivals, but one of pure reverence that has quietly defined their journey in country music. To get the full picture, you have to understand the men themselves. James William Anderson III, born in South Carolina but raised in Georgia, was a wordsmith from day one. With a journalism degree, he had a special knack for crafting a story that would stick. While working as a DJ at just 19 years old, he wrote a song on a hotel rooftop in Commerce, Georgia. That song, City Lights, was recorded by Ray Price and shot to #1 in 1958. It was the key that unlocked Nashville for the young man they'd soon call Whisperin' Bill. His own hits like Still, Po' Folks, and Mama Sang a Song showcased his breathy, conversational style, which stood out among the booming voices of the time. But his biggest impact, arguably, came from his songwriting. He wrote for everyone. Connie Smith's Once a Day, Lefty Frizzle's Saginaw, Michigan, and countless hits for stars like Kenny Chesney, George Strait, and Vince Gill all came from his pen. He landed in the Country Music Hall of Fame, the Songwriters Hall of Fame, and was the first country songwriter ever to get the BMI Icon Award. Bill Anderson wasn't just in the country music business, he helped build the whole thing. Meanwhile, down in Palestine, Texas, Gary Gene Watson was finding his own gift. Born in 1943, he grew up singing in church, soaking in the sounds of his dad's blues harmonica and the honky-tonk cries of Lefty Frizzell. For years, music was just a part of his life, not his job. Watson fixed cars for a living, a trade he never entirely left behind, and played clubs around Houston at night, paying his dues far from the Nashville spotlight. Then, 1975 happened. A song he'd recorded for a small regional label, Love in the Hot Afternoon, got picked up by Capitol Records. It soared to #3 on the charts, and suddenly the rest of the country knew what Texas already did. Gene Watson had one of the best voices around. Hits like Paper Rosie, Farewell Party, and the #1 smash, 14 Karat Mind, cemented his place. He was seen as an heir to the traditional country throne, his sound defined by weeping steel guitar and mournful fiddle. He didn't chase trends, he set a standard. In doing so, he earned a title that might mean more than any award. His peers started calling him the singer's singer, so you have two men on two different paths. One was the Nashville insider, the poet who shaped the industry. The other was the Texas traditionalist, the vocal purist who became a benchmark for every other singer. They moved in the same world, but it was their shared love for the heart of country music that would eventually bring their journeys together. In Nashville, the bond between a songwriter and a singer is sacred. A great song is a story waiting for the right voice to bring it to life. A great singer can take those words and melody and turn them into something everybody feels. For decades, Bill Anderson has been the one crafting those stories of life, love, and loss with a poet's touch. Just think about the sheer range of his work. He could write a simple, devastating line in The Tip of My Fingers, a song that was a top 10 hit for 4 different artists in 4 different decades. He could capture the gut-wrenching pain of Whiskey Lullaby, which became a CMA Song of the Year for Brad Paisley and Alison Krauss. He could tell a story as rich as a short novel, like he did in Saginaw, Michigan. Bill wasn't just writing songs, he was building entire worlds in 3.5 minutes. On the other side of that equation is a singer like Gene Watson. Watson was famously picky about his songs. For a vocalist of his caliber, a song isn't just a shot at a hit. It's something he has to live with for the rest of his career. Watson once explained his process this way. Traditional country is about life, heartaches, loves, and family. I've got to relate to the words as something that either happened to me or happened to someone I know. I want more out of a song. And that philosophy? It's the whole key. Watson was searching for songs with weight and soul. He wasn't interested in pop country fluff. He wanted music that had something to say. His recording process was old school. He'd often record live with his band in the room, skipping the vocal booth to capture the raw energy of the moment. He wasn't just singing notes, he was living inside the song. It was this shared dedication to the emotional core of country music that made the pairing of a Bill Anderson song and a Gene Watson vocal almost inevitable. Anderson wrote the kind of rich, story-driven lyrics a singer like Watson could really dig into. And Watson had the kind of powerful, nuanced voice that could turn a great song into an unforgettable classic. It was a perfect storm of talent, just waiting for the right song to bring them together. Every great musical partnership has that one song, the one that perfectly captures their magic. For Bill Anderson and Gene Watson, it's the haunting ballad, When a Man Can't Get a Woman Off His Mind. This song is more than just a deep cut. It's the heart of their story. The song was co-written by Bill Anderson and another brilliant songwriter, Sharon Vaughn. It's a classic country heartbreaker about a man tormented by a memory he can't shake. The lyrics paint a desperate picture. I've been fighting with these sheets again. Can't make myself lie still. My pillowcase is soaking wet, and yet I feel a chill. It gets crazy when a man can't get a woman off his mind. It's a masterclass in showing the agony of heartbreak. One of the song's best lines even has its own legend. The line, "I just crushed a Dixie cup for running out of wine," is a perfect snapshot of helpless frustration. On his website, Anderson shared that he and Vaughn had the first verse and chorus done. While she took a break, he came up with a new line, "I just cussed a Dixie cup for running out of wine." Vaughn loved it but suggested one tiny brilliant tweak. And with that, the final, more powerful image was born. The song was first recorded by Craig Morgan in 2000, but the story goes that Gene Watson was at the Grand Ole Opry one night when the singer Jimmy C. Newman told him he had to hear this track on Morgan's album. Watson listened, and as he put it, "I was hooked." He knew he had to cut it. But here's where the story takes a classic music business turn. Watson recorded the song, but before it could be properly released, his record label abruptly shut down its country division. The song, and Watson's incredible master recording, was trapped in legal limbo. The track was dead in the water. A great performance, however, never really dies. The song was resurrected during a taping of Country's Family Reunion, the beloved TV series hosted by Bill Anderson himself. The episode was a tribute to Bill's songwriting, and when it was Gene Watson's turn, he chose to sing "When a Man Can't Get a Woman Off His Mind." The audience was absolutely mesmerized. As Watson recalled, "Boy, after that, everybody that saw that TV show wanted to buy the song. The fan demand was overwhelming. They had heard the perfect marriage of a classic country song and a classic country voice, and they wanted it." Finally, after years of requests, Watson went back into the studio and re-recorded the song for his album Real Country Music. It was pure, traditional country, dripping with the fiddle and steel guitar that perfectly fit his voice. Listening to Watson's version, you hear exactly why it connected. He doesn't just sing the lyrics, he lives them. It's the kind of performance that makes a songwriter's work feel truly complete. No wonder Bill Anderson would later say to Gene, "I treasure those recordings because you're everybody's favorite singer, and it's such an honor to have you sing something that I wrote." While "When a Man Can't Get a Woman Off His Mind" is their most famous collaboration, it wasn't the only one. A look through their catalog shows a quiet but consistent partnership. Watson didn't just record one Bill Anderson song, he recorded several, each time finding something in Anderson's writing that spoke to his traditional country soul, to uncover the most intense arguments, both on air and off, that revealed what happened when Johnny Carson's patience finally ran out. Our first story doesn't happen under the bright studio lights, but in the tense, quiet space of Johnny Carson's private office. It involves a man who was, for a time, a frequent and friendly guest on The Tonight Show, the sequined, high-voiced, quintessential Las Vegas performer, Wayne Newton. In the early days, their relationship was perfectly friendly. Newton was a rising star, and an appearance on Carson was a golden ticket. He showed up about 30 times, and their dynamic was always professional. But something shifted. The exact reason is up for debate, but many point to a business deal that went south. In 1980, both Carson and Newton were trying to buy the Aladdin Hotel in Las Vegas. When Newton won the bid, a friendly rivalry seemed to curdle into something much worse. Suddenly, Wayne Newton became a regular punchline in Carson's monologues. The jokes weren't just about his Vegas act. They got pointed and personal, often questioning his masculinity. Newton remembered a whole new brand of humor coming from Carson, aimed directly at him. There were jokes about his high-pitched voice, his appearance, and not-so-subtle digs about his sexuality. One particularly nasty line was Carson quipping, "I saw Wayne Newton and Liberace in a heart-shaped bathtub together." For the audience, it was just another joke. For Newton, it was a public humiliation that chipped away at the image he'd spent a lifetime building. For nearly 2 years, Newton tried to handle it professionally. He called Carson's agents, his producers, his managers, anyone who might listen, begging them to make it stop. His calls were ignored. The jokes kept coming, night after night. Newton felt the constant attacks weren't just mean. They were starting to have a real impact, even fueling absurd rumors that he was tied to organized crime. He believed Carson's influence was so massive that he could make those kinds of damaging ideas stick. The breaking point came when Newton was at a recording studio in Los Angeles. A drummer casually asked if he'd seen The Tonight Show, the night. Before, calling the monologue pretty brutal. That was it. Newton was done. He left the session, got in his car, and drove straight to the NBC studios in Burbank. He walked right into Johnny Carson's office, where the host was in a meeting with his famous producer, Fred de Cordova. Newton, in his own words, calmly asked de Cordova to leave them alone. The producer left, and the door closed. Now it was just the king of late night and Mr. Las Vegas, face to face. What happened next is the stuff of Hollywood legend. According to Newton's own account on Larry, "King live," he laid it all out. "I said, I don't know what friend of yours I've killed. I don't know what child of yours I've hurt. I don't know what food I've taken out of your mouth," Newton recounted. But these jokes about me will stop, and they'll stop now, or I will kick your ass. He described Carson as stammering, trying to play it cool by saying he was Newton's biggest fan. Newton wasn't having it. He made it clear he was there to settle things one way or another. The message was sent. The threat was real. Carson, a man used to being in total control, was allegedly shaken. He'd been confronted in his own sanctuary. His power neutralized for a moment. And the aftermath? The jokes stopped. Almost immediately, the Wayne Newton punchlines disappeared from Carson's monologues. Newton did appear on the show again, but the warmth was gone, replaced by what people called forced smiles and awkward small talk. Publicly, the feud was over, but privately, a line had been drawn. Wayne Newton did the unthinkable. He stood up to Johnny Carson and won. But in doing so, he created a permanent, icy distance between two of entertainment's biggest stars. In a later interview, Newton didn't mince words, stating, "Johnny Carson was a mean-spirited human being, and there are people that he has hurt that people will never know about." If the Wayne Newton story showed a Carson who could be pushed to the edge behind closed doors, our next confrontation shows a Carson who would ruthlessly protect his stage in front of millions. This is the story of the night Johnny Carson, an amateur magician himself, systematically dismantled the world-famous psychic Uri Geller. By 1973, Uri Geller was a huge international star. The Israeli-British personality was famous for his supposed psychic abilities, especially his signature trick, bending spoons and keys with the power of his mind. He called it the Geller effect, and audiences were captivated. He wasn't just a magician. He claimed his powers were real. That distinction was key, and it was a line Johnny Carson, a lifelong student of magic, was not about to let him cross. On The Tonight Show, Carson knew illusion. He knew the difference between entertainment and deception. So, when Geller was booked, Carson made a critical call. He reached out to James the Amazing Randi, a professional magician and legendary debunker of paranormal claims. Randi gave Carson a simple but brilliant piece of advice: control the props. Geller's team had sent over a list of things he'd need. Carson and Randi correctly guessed that Geller's powers might depend on objects that were already bent or messed with. So, on August 1st, 1973, a trap was set. The Tonight Show. Staff got their own spoons, keys, and other items, and kept them hidden. Geller and his team weren't allowed anywhere near the props before he walked on stage. The segment began. Geller sat down next to Johnny, probably expecting a friendly chat to warm up the crowd. Instead, Carson, with a cool, almost clinical demeanor, pointed to a tray of items on the desk. What followed was one of the most painfully awkward 22 minutes in TV history. Geller's face immediately dropped. He knew he was caught. Pointing at the tray of normal, unprepared objects, he stammered, "This scares me." He tried to stall, to explain away what was happening. He told Carson he usually used his own things, that he wasn't feeling strong that night, and that the host was putting too much pressure on him. He claimed he needed the right mood, the right energy, and that Carson's skepticism was blocking his powers. Carson stayed polite but firm. He just encouraged Geller to give it a try. He'd hand him a spoon, lean back, and wait. The silence was deafening. The camera would zoom in on the spoon in Geller's hand, then to Geller's face, twisted in concentration, and then to Carson's, a mask of patient, knowing calm. Ed McMahon sat next to him, nervously fidgeting. The audience, which had been buzzing with excitement, grew quiet as the tension filled the room. Again and again, Geller failed. He couldn't bend a single spoon. He couldn't move the hands of a watch. He couldn't guess what was in a sealed metal canister. His entire psychic arsenal was useless. As one writer later put it, the segment was a legendary immolation. At the end of the painful ordeal, with Geller having accomplished nothing, Carson leaned forward, his voice dripping with sarcasm, and said, If he had real powers, he'd have seen it coming. Uri Geller was never invited back on The Tonight Show. The appearance on what was then the biggest stage in television was a public takedown of his act. Geller himself admitted he was devastated, thinking his career was over. Ironically, the spectacular failure had an unexpected side effect. For many of his believers, the fact that his powers didn't work on command only made them seem more real. After all, a simple magic trick would work every time. His popularity actually grew in some circles. But the message from Carson was crystal clear. He was the gatekeeper of his stage, and he would not let his audience be fooled. He didn't yell, he didn't argue. He just used the power of his platform to demand proof. And when none was offered, he let the silence speak for itself. It was a masterclass in control and a brutal public humiliation. Not all of Carson's feuds were with his enemies. Maybe the most famous and painful fallout of his entire career was with someone he considered a genuine friend and protege, Joan Rivers. Their split wasn't a backstage screaming match or an on-air debate. It was a silent, complete, and permanent end to one of the most important relationships in late-night history. From her first appearance on The Tonight Show in 1965, it was obvious Johnny and Joan had special chemistry. After she had struggled, for years Carson saw her talent and said on air, "You're going to be a star." That one moment changed her life. She became a regular on the show, and their interviews were legendary. Carson, who was often reserved, would be brought to tears of laughter by Rivers' sharp, self-deprecating humor. He became her mentor, and she became his most dependable and beloved guest host. By 1983, it was official. She was named the permanent guest host, Carson's heir apparent whenever he took a vacation. It was a bond built over 2 decades, and it seemed unbreakable. But by the mid-1980s, cracks started to show, not in their friendship, but in Rivers' relationship with NBC. Even though she was loyal and a huge part of the show, the network wouldn't give her a long-term contract or even seriously consider her as Carson's successor. When a list of potential replacements for Johnny was leaked to the press, her name wasn't on it. The sting of being overlooked and her loyalty not being rewarded started to fester. Then, in 1986, the new Fox network came to her with an offer she couldn't refuse: $10 million to host her own late-night talk show, directly competing with The Tonight Show. Not only would she be the first woman to ever host a late-night network talk show, but Fox also agreed to hire her husband, Edgar Rosenberg, as a producer. It was a history-making opportunity and a chance for the security NBC had never offered her. This is where the story turns into a tragic case of he said, she said. Rivers claimed that the moment she got the offer, the very first person she called to tell was Johnny Carson. According to her, he slammed the phone down on her. She called back, and he hung up on her again. That was the last time they ever spoke. Carson's side of the story was completely different. He claimed he never got a call. He said he found out about her new show from the press, just like everyone else. For a man who demanded total loyalty, this was the ultimate betrayal. He had mentored her, made her a star on his stage, and in his eyes, she had repaid him by sneaking behind his back to become his direct competitor. The fallout was immediate and devastating. Carson wasn't just hurt, he was furious. He banned Joan Rivers from ever appearing on The Tonight Show again. But his anger didn't stop there. He started an unofficial but brutally effective blacklist. Anyone who appeared on The Late Show with Joan Rivers was told they were no longer welcome on The Tonight Show. In the world of 1980s Hollywood, this was a career death sentence. Forced to choose between the new Fox show and the institutional power of Johnny Carson, almost everyone chose Carson. Rivers' show was in trouble from the start. It was impossible to book A-list guests. Some network affiliates, out of loyalty to Carson, wouldn't even air her program. The pressure was immense, ratings dropped, and the show became a disaster. After just 7 months, Fox executives asked Rivers to fire her husband as producer. She refused, and the network fired them both. Tragically, 3 months later, her husband, Edgar Rosenberg, took his own life, a devastating event that Rivers always connected to the humiliation and stress from the Fox disaster. In one fell swoop, Joan Rivers lost her mentor, her show, her husband, and her career was in shambles. The ban from The Tonight Show was absolute. It stayed in place for the rest of Carson's time as host. And in a stunning display of Carson's lasting power and the industry's respect for him, the ban was honored by his successor Jay Leno for his entire 22-year run. For 26 years, Joan Rivers was an exile from the show that had been her home. She would sometimes see Carson in restaurants and try to talk to him, but he would refuse to speak to her. The silence was total and final, lasting until his death in 2005. Rivers believed Carson's reaction was way over the top and came from a sense of ownership. "I think he really felt because I was a woman that I just was his," she once wrote. "I think it was a question of, I found you, and you're my property." The ban was finally lifted in 2014, when Jimmy Fallon became the host. Joan Rivers returned to The Tonight Show stage for the first time in nearly 3 decades, just a few months before she passed away. It was a touching, full-circle moment, but it couldn't erase the years of pain and the heartbreaking end to one of comedy's greatest friendships. Not every confrontation was a dramatic, friendship-ending blow-up. Sometimes the tension on The Tonight Show was a slow burn, fueled by clashing egos and very different approaches to comedy. 2 of the most famous examples of this were with men who were legends themselves, Bob Hope and Don Rickles. First, let's talk about Bob Hope. On the surface, Hope was a welcome guest, such a part of the establishment that the band would play his theme song, "Thanks for the Memory," whenever he walked out. But behind the scenes, Carson reportedly grew to dread his appearances. Their comedic styles were complete opposites. Carson loved spontaneity and real off-the-cuff conversation. Hope, on the other hand, was all about preparation. He would show up with a stack of pre-written jokes and stories, treating the interview not as a conversation, but as a performance. For Carson, this was incredibly boring. He couldn't get a real interview out of Hope. He'd ask a question, and Hope would fire back with a canned one-liner that went nowhere. The tension would show up on air in subtle but clear ways. You could see Carson's frustration. He'd sit back, his smile getting a little tighter, as Hope launched into another prepared bit. The natural, easy rhythm of the show would just grind to a halt. On top of that, Hope had a reputation for ignoring the strict time limits of live television. Staffers would tell him he had an 8-minute segment, and he would stretch it to 20. He'd be told he couldn't show a clip, and he'd bring one anyway, often one that was much longer than promised. For Carson, who ran his show with military precision, this showed a profound lack of professional respect. While he couldn't just ban a huge figure like Bob Hope, the on-air friction was a clear sign of the clash between Carson's modern conversational style and Hope's old-school vaudevillian act. Then there was Don Rickles, the merchant of venom. Carson gave him the nickname Mr. Warmth, and their relationship was a complicated mix of real affection and high-stakes comedic battles. Rickles' whole act was about pushing boundaries. He would come out, ignore Carson, and make a big show of hugging Ed McMahon. He would insult Johnny, the audience, the band, and anyone else he could. It was his thing. Most of the time, Carson loved it. He was a master at playing the straight man to Rickles' chaos, but sometimes Rickles would go too far, even for Johnny. The most legendary example of this didn't even happen when Carson was there. Rickles was guest hosting The Tonight Show. During the show, in a moment of spontaneous destruction, he playfully picked up Johnny's beloved wooden cigarette box, a fixture on his desk for years, and broke it. When Carson came back and found His prized possession damaged, he was genuinely furious. He reportedly told his crew, "He broke my damn box." But instead of a private fight, Carson, ever the showman, turned it into television gold. The next day, he found out Rickles was filming his own sitcom, CPO Sharky, on a nearby set. In the middle of a live taping, Carson, with a camera crew following him, stormed onto Rickles' set to confront him about the broken box. The clip is iconic. The audience for CPO Sharky went wild, seeing the king of late night interrupt their show. Rickles played his part perfectly, pretending to be shocked. It became a classic TV moment, but behind the laughs, the anger was real. Carson reportedly banned Rickles from the show for a while. It wasn't permanent, but it was long. Enough to send a clear message. You can insult me, you can mock me, but you do not touch my stuff. It was a fascinating peek into Carson's personal boundaries, showing that even with his closest comedy partners, there was a line you just didn't cross. The most profound and intense arguments in Johnny Carson's life didn't happen with celebrities, under the studio lights, but in the shadows of his private life, most painfully with his own son, Rick. This wasn't a fight over jokes or show business. It was a conflict born from years of pain, emotional distance, and the huge pressure of being the son of one of the most famous men in America. Johnny Carson was a notoriously private person. While he was in millions of homes every night, he kept his own home life fiercely protected. He was married 4 times and had 3 sons with his first wife, Jody Wolcott, Chris, Rick, and Corey. By all accounts, his relationship with his children was strained. His dedication to The Tonight Show was all-consuming, and being a father often came second. His co-author Mike Thomas noted that Johnny was married to The Tonight Show. That was his life. His middle son, Rick, born in 1952, seemed to carry the heaviest burden of this emotional distance. Friends and biographers say that Rick struggled immensely. This private turmoil would sometimes spill out into public view. The most infamous incident happened in 1987 at the star-studded party for The Tonight Show's 25th anniversary. It should have been a night of triumph for Johnny. Instead, it turned into a scene of family horror. According to multiple reports, both Johnny and Rick had been drinking. When Johnny saw his son drunk, he flew into a rage. The two started screaming at each other in front of NBC executives, celebrities, and horrified friends. Their argument got so heated that Johnny nearly hit his son, and they had to be physically pulled apart. It was a raw, ugly, and public look into the private pain that Carson worked so hard to hide. Tragically, there would be no happy ending to this tortured relationship. On June 21, 1991, Rick Carson, a talented photographer, died in a car accident. He was driving along a service road on the California coast when his vehicle went over an embankment. He was only 39 years old. The loss absolutely shattered Johnny. Those close to him said he was never the same and was haunted by the regret of not being a more present father for the rest of his life. 3 weeks after Rick's death, Carson returned to The Tonight Show. In a move that was completely out of character, he broke his own cardinal rule and talked directly about his private life. For the last few minutes of the show, he paid a moving tribute to his son. He told the audience, "When Rick was around, you wanted to smile. He had a laugh that was contagious as could be. He tried so darn hard to please.